Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is R.S. Raghu, and with me is Navanita Adhikari, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment, and more. The headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi says government is working round the clock to bring back Indians stranded in war-torn Ukraine. Indian Embassy in Ukraine issues urgent advisory asking its nationals to leave Kharkiv immediately. Nearly 17,000 Indian nationals leave Ukraine borders since advisory issued, says MEA. India evacuates stranded citizens from Ukraine via Moldova. National Disaster Response Force sends relief material to Ukraine. European Union bans 7 Russian banks from SWIFT. And in cricket, 12th ICC Women's World Cup to begin from Friday in New Zealand. With the new Omicron variant of coronavirus causing concern, we appeal to our listeners to be vigilant and get fully vaccinated, and also help others, including children between 15 and 18 years, to get vaccinated. Please continue to follow these 3 simple steps to stay safe. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact the national helpline numbers 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that the government is working round the clock to bring back Indians stranded in war-torn Ukraine. In an interview to a Hindi daily, Mr. Modi said government is aware of the hardships faced by Indian students due to the war situation and is leaving no stone unturned to ensure that every Indian reaches home safely. The Prime Minister said weather conditions did make things difficult for us at several places. He said this is the reason why the government prioritized the evacuation of students and other Indian nationals from those areas where fighting was intense. Mr. Modi said he personally spoke to several heads of state. He said all ministries involved in this mission are working with complete dedication. As a result, when the students return home after being evacuated, people can clearly see the happiness on their faces. Their parents are relieved. The Prime Minister told the newspaper that he has sent 4 union ministers to oversee evacuations from countries bordering Ukraine. He said when those stranded children see that the ministers have personally come to take them home, they are relieved and they are hopeful of reaching home safely. Mr. Modi said government has mobilized NGOs and organizations owned by Indians in countries sharing borders with Ukraine. He said well before the beginning of the war, Indian Embassy was in touch with the students and has been constantly guiding them. The Prime Minister said before the war, there was a cap on the number of flights between India and Ukraine, but Government of India spoke to the Ukrainian officials and relaxed the curbs so that number of flights can be increased. He said it is a result of our efforts that we were able to safely evacuate nearly 12,000 Indian students from Ukraine. Mr. Modi emphasized the role of the Air Force, which is now taking part in both evacuating Indians and providing aid and relief materials to Ukraine. He said, besides regular flights, we have also roped in the Indian Air Force for evacuations. The Prime Minister said for the next 30 days, a total of 30 flights will be bringing back Indians from Ukraine. Prime Minister Narendra Modi held a high-level meeting on the Ukraine crisis today evening. Mr. Modi has been continuously chairing high-level meetings on since the Ukraine crisis began. During the meetings, Mr. Modi has been reviewing the ongoing efforts under Operation Ganga to bring back Indians stranded in Ukraine.
There has been a sharp increase in the number of Indians who have left Ukraine. Briefing media in New Delhi, Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Arindam Bagchi said nearly 17,000 Indian nationals have left Ukraine's borders since the advisories were issued. He said it includes some Indians who have not registered with the embassy earlier.
There has been a sharp increase in the number of Indians who have left Ukraine over recent past. We now estimate that nearly 17,000 Indian nationals have left Ukraine's borders since our advisories were issued.
Mr. Bagchi said flights under Operation Ganga have also increased sharply. He added during the last 24 hours, 6 flights have landed in India, taking the total number of flights that have landed in India to 15, and the total number of Indians who have returned on these flights to 3,352. The spokesperson said as many as 15 flights are scheduled over the next 24 hours.
Remember 6 flights last 24 hours? But 15 flights are scheduled over the next 24 hours. Some of these are already actually en route. Indian Air Force aircraft have now joined Op Ganga with the first C-17 flight from Bucharest expected to return to Delhi from Bucharest later tonight. 3 more Indian Air Force flights will be undertaken today from Budapest, Bucharest and Rzeszów in Poland.
The spokesperson said the cities in eastern Ukraine remain an area of concern as there has been continuing violence. He said there are encouraging reports that some students were able to board trains out of Kharkiv yesterday night and today morning. An embassy assisted them in the process through student contractors and other partners. News Justin. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has spoken short while ago on phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The leaders reviewed the situation in Ukraine, especially in the city of Kharkiv, where many Indian students are stuck. They discussed the safe evacuation of the Indian nationals from the conflict areas. The Indian Embassy in Ukraine has issued an urgent advisory for Indian nationals in Kharkiv. The embassy said for their own safety and security, the Indian nationals must leave Kharkiv in the light of the deteriorating situation. The Indian embassy said they should proceed to Paisochin, Babai and Bezlizovka as soon as possible for their safety. The embassy said under all circumstances, the Indian nationals must reach Paisochin, Babai and Bezlizovka by 6 p.m. Ukrainian time today. It said those students who cannot find vehicles or buses and are in railway station can proceed on foot to Paisochin, which is 11 kilometers, Babai, which is 12 kilometers, and Bezlizovka, which is 16 kilometers.
Indian Embassy in Romania, in coordination with Moldovan authorities, is organizing movement of Indian nationals stranded in Odessa, Ukraine, to Bucharest through Moldova. The airspace in Moldova is closed, so Indians are being sent to Bucharest. The embassy is organizing 2 routes for buses, 1 set of buses for those crossing the Palanca border and being sent directly to Romania without stopping in Moldova. Another route for those who are in the camps located in and around the capital, Chisinau. The bus services are being provided free of cost. Since yesterday, about 250 students have crossed over to Romania and they have all been sent by buses organized by embassy directly to Bucharest from the border. About 80 to 100 Indian nationals are still left in and around Chisinau, and most will be leaving by a bus later today. In Bucharest, Indian Embassy is helping the Indian nationals with flights under Operation Ganga. Embassy, in coordination with Romanian authorities, has ensured that no visa is required to exit Romania through special flights. Civil Aviation Minister Jyotiraditya Scindia, who is in Romania for evacuation of Indian nations, has said that government is mounting 6 flights today in Bucharest, Romania, carrying over 1,200 Indian students back to India. Mr. Scindia thanked Air India, Indigo and Air India Express for rising to the challenge and working round the clock with the government on evacuation operations.
Vice Chief of Air Staff Air Marshal Sandeep Singh today briefed the media about the role of Indian Air Force in the Operation Ganga to evacuate Indians from Ukraine. He said evacuation operation will run round the clock. Indian Air Force can send 4 aircrafts in a day and 200 people will be brought back in one round. He added, the Indian Air Force Vice Chief expressed confidence that all Indians will be brought back safely. Russians and Ukrainians delegation to resume talks this evening about the war in Ukraine. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters the delegation will be in place to await Ukrainian negotiators. He did not indicate where the talks could take place. There was no immediate word from Ukrainian authorities about their plans. The first round of talks on resolving the Russia-Ukraine war were held near the Belarus-Ukraine border last Sunday, remained inconclusive.
Ukraine says Russia has escalated its attack on crowded cities. Ukrainian leaders called it a blatant terror campaign. President Volodymyr Zelensky said that nobody will forgive and forget after yesterday's attack on the Central Square in Kharkiv and the bombing of a TV tower in the capital. Ukrainian authorities said 5 people were killed in the attack on the TV tower near central Kiev. A TV control room and a power substation were hit. Russia previously told people living in near transmission facilities used by Ukraine's intelligence agencies to leave their homes. Zelensky's office also reported a missile attack yesterday on the site of the Babi Yar Holocaust Memorial, which is adjacent to the TV tower. In Kharkiv, with a population of about 1.5 million, at least 6 people were killed when the region's administrative building on Freedom Square was hit with what was believed to be a missile. The Slovenian Foreign Ministry said its consulate in Kharkiv was destroyed. Ukraine's emergency services said another Russian airstrike hit a residential area in the city of Zhytomyr that killed at least 2 people, burnt 3 homes. The UN Human Rights Office said it has recorded 136 civilian deaths. The European Union has banned 7 Russian banks from the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications SWIFT global system that underpins cross-border payments, but it spared 2 financial institutions in Russia because they are key to transactions for EU energy imports. The EU left out Gazprom Bank and Sberbank from its move on Wednesday to disconnect parts of the Russian financial industry from the SWIFT secure messaging network.
The UN Refugee Agency said more than 874,000 people have fled Ukraine since Russia's military operation last week. It added the figure is rising exponentially, putting it on track to cross the 1 million mark possibly within hours. UNHCR spokeswoman Shabia Manto said today that people are continuing to stream into Ukraine's neighboring countries to the west, with more than 2 lakh fleeing since Tuesday. A day earlier, Manto had cautioned that the outflows from Ukraine could make it the source of the biggest refugee crisis this century, eclipsing the one from Syria's war over the last decade. The latest figures show that more than half, or nearly 4,54,000, have gone to Poland, more than 1,16,300 to Hungary, and over 79,300 to Moldova. Another 69,000 have gone to other European countries, and 67,000 have fled to Slovakia. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you discussion on Ukraine crisis and its impact on India. In conversation are Atul Aneja, international affairs expert, and Manas Pratim Bhuyan, journalist.
Mr. Aneja, the Ukraine situation is actually deteriorating. We have seen the onslaught by Russian forces, the fightings in multiple cities, including Ukrainian capital Kyiv and Kharkiv. There were hundreds of Indians in the conflict zones, but still, in fact, India has launched a massive evacuation operation under which we are operating flights from various neighboring countries to bring back those Indians who could manage to cross over to these European countries like Romania, Hungary, Poland and Slovakia. But now again, in fact, the focus is on the evacuation of the Indians who are stranded, who are stuck in the conflict zones. Yesterday, 1 Indian was killed in shelling in Kharkiv city, a medical student, following which India has taken up the issue of safety and security of Indians with both Russia and Ukraine. And today, latest, the Indian embassy in Ukraine has issued a very urgent advisory asking all the Indian nationals in Kharkiv city to leave the city and head towards 3 locations. So how do you see the overall situation in Ukraine and India's evacuation missions to bring back Indian nationals from various parts of the Ukraine, as well as our efforts to coordinate with Romania, Poland, Slovakia, Moldova to operate flights from these countries to bring back the stranded Indians?
Manas, it is indeed an extraordinarily difficult situation for us, especially because many of these students, you mentioned Kharkiv, are trapped in the war zone, and getting them from there safely up to points from where flights have been organized is a Herculean and a very difficult task. I think what we have done could have been done better, mobilizing our 4 ministers who are there on the ground to coordinate the evacuation effort, mobilization of not only civil aviation but C-17 Globemaster planes from the Indian Air Force. I mean, no stops have been left unturned to provide the infrastructure facilities for the evacuation. However, having done so, there are certain objective situations on the ground which make it very difficult for a section of the Indians to come out to the safety zone. You mentioned Kharkiv especially, where we lost Indian student in shelling. And now you mentioned about the urgent appeal from our embassy in Kyiv for students or any Indian nationals to leave Kharkiv. But Manas, the road from Kharkiv onwards to the border is lined with troop movement and the possibility, and fighting is taking place sometimes. And shelling is going on. Unless we get a safe passage, which would mean the Russians have to provide it to the Russian border. I don't see, it's very difficult for this evacuation to take place safely. For these people, especially in Kharkiv, is an enormous challenge now to come back to the situation. It will require, I'm sure the Ministry of External Affairs and other agencies are on top of it, and we should be making arrangements. But I think safe passage now is critical for evacuation to take place. We are all geared up to provide whatever facilities. Teams have been sent to all border points from the Indian embassy and consulates in Russia and other elsewhere who speak the Russian language at the border points. Young officers from the missions are there to assist. Everything has been done. Make sure that there are no bottlenecks which will come in the way to the evacuation process. But the last thing which we need is a safe passage. And I think the Government of India, MEA, the missions are all working at it to get this safe passage for the remaining students and others to reach safety. We have done evacuations in the past from various places, but I think, getting people out of place where active fighting is taking place is perhaps an unprecedented challenge. And I hope that with all the Herculean effort, as I said, which has been put in, will yield positive results and we'll be able to get the remaining people stranded in Ukraine to safety.
Mr. Aneja, the Russian ambassador designate to India, he spoke to the media today, and during his online press briefing, he said that Russia is working intensely to create a humanitarian corridor for safe passage of Indian nationals to Russian territory. After India just took up the issue yesterday very strongly following the death of the Indian national in Kharkiv. So how do you see this assurance provided we have a very strong relationship with Russia, and the incident of yesterday when our national was killed, that was taken very seriously in India. Prime Minister held a very high-level meeting in the evening, and again we impressed upon both the countries, Ukraine and Russia, both in New Delhi as well as in Moscow and Kyiv, to urgently arrange for a safe passage of Indians who are stuck in various conflict zones. And today, the Russian ambassador designate, he assured that Russia has been working intensely on creating the corridor and secure safe passages for Indians stuck in various conflict zones in Ukraine. So how do you see the assurance?
I'm certain that the Russians are going to deliver on this. Manas, as you mentioned, we have an extraordinarily strong relationship not only with Russia, but there's a personal chemistry between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin. And we saw that in December itself when President Putin met Prime Minister Modi, only second leader he had met. He had met President Biden earlier, but he went out of his way for that visit, which showed not only the depth of the India-Russia relationship, but the personal chemistry between the two leaders. And they have spoken to each other. And when the Russian ambassador in India says that they're going to provide safe passage and a humanitarian corridor, I'm certain that these are not empty words. And going by what Russians have, by their nature and our past experience with them, I have no doubt that this effort will be made and a humanitarian corridor would be created by the Russian side. And by the way, I think our strategic autonomy doctrine is really paying off, because we are also having cooperation from other areas of Ukraine where people are reaching Romania, Hungary, and Poland. Prime Minister has gone out of his way and personally spoken to these individuals and mounted this Operation Ganga, for evacuation. It not only the Russians, but people who might be on the other side of the fence, minus Hungary. I mean, I'm talking of Romania and Poland. And we are having full cooperation from them as well. The framework has been created for the full evacuation to take place. Again, what has been narrowed down is this Kharkiv and Sumy area, which are problematic areas where the Russians will have to be probably called into play. And when the ambassador says that he's going to deliver and the Russians will provide a humanitarian corridor, I'm certain that this is going to happen. But these are extraordinarily challenging times, Manas, to get people out safely from a zone where active fighting is taking. I can't remember, frankly. I saw the Beirut evacuation during the 2005-2006 personally. There was shells were not falling on the port in Beirut or anywhere. So we did that. I saw the Libya evacuation we managed. But you are now in the middle of the crossfire and in certain areas of it, not all. And that adds to the complexity of the situation and why the task becomes more arduous. And that's the reason why GOI is talking to all agencies, irrespective of which side of the aisle they are on this conflict.
Yes, in fact, India had issued a number of advisories since February 15 before the conflict actually began, before the ASEAN attack began. And the Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla at a media briefing, he said that there were around 20,000 Indians in Ukraine at the time the first advisory was issued in mid-February. And the number has now gone up to 12,000 who have actually left the country. This includes people who have voluntarily left the country after the advisories were issued, and plus people who have crossed over to borders with Romania, Poland, Slovak Republic, and Hungary. But this number is massive. He yesterday said that we are running 26 flights in the next 3 days to evacuate the Indians who have crossed over to these neighboring countries. So don't you think, Taneja, it was a massive evacuation operation that we launched under the name of Operation Ganga, and the kind of effort that Government of India has put in. Prime Minister Modi has been holding very high-level meetings almost regularly. So how do you see evacuation mission that India has launched, and India managed to bring back few thousand Indians in the midst of a massive conflict in Ukraine?
Manas, what is most stunning, in fact, is the focus on a whole of government approach. It's not one section, which is, frankly, it is Team India which is carrying out the evacuation with the Prime Minister quite transparently leading from the front. There have been evacuations in the past, but dispatching 4 ministers on the ground. Personally, the External Affairs Ministry is totally involved. Mr. Jaishankar, the Foreign Minister, External Affairs Minister, is himself making all the calls and arrangements. The hands-on approach by the Prime Minister, who's just taken personal charge of it. You can see the energy which the evacuation is taking place. And the Prime Minister today himself said that the safety of all Indians who are caught in this extraordinarily complex and a difficult situation, and bringing them to safety is his personal responsibility. This is the whole nation coming together, and the whole of government approach to make sure that our nationals are brought to safety. I don't see any other nation mounting such an effort, to be honest. And despite the fact that there are countries of various citizens of various nationalities who have been caught in the crossfire. But except India, I don't see any other country mounting such a massive effort, deploying its entire might to get its own citizens to safety.
Anuja, in fact, another aspect is that India's position on the overall crisis. India abstained from a voting at the UN Security Council when it was discussing a resolution deploring the Russian military attack on Ukraine. So India has been maintaining that the crisis has to be resolved through talks, and India has also said very clearly that sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries must be respected in a kind of message to Russia. So how do you see India's overall position? And I would also like to ask you about the implications of the crisis in Ukraine on India. Will it impact India's defense procurement from Russia in the wake of severe sanctions imposed by Western countries on Russia? So how do you see the overall impact of the crisis on India, as well as India's position on the crisis?
You see, Manas, India is a major power, and we have excellent relationships on both sides of the fence. We have very good relations with Russia on the Eurasian side, and the bilateral relationship is also very strong and diversified, including the procurement of military equipment from Russia. So Russia remains very, very important partner for us. At the same time, the United States has emerged as a major partner, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, and we need to maintain those excellent relations. I think they understand India's position, that we are not playing any zero-sum game. We are guarding our national interests, but more than that, we are doing it in a principled way. The very fact that we've abstained is a testimony to that we are not going to be partisan here and join either party, because we have interests. Our national interests are tied up with these countries. So we will not take an extreme view, but the focus is on the resolution of the problem. And the resolution of the problem comes through diplomacy. And that is India's position now, that you move on, talk and get this resolved, because it is not in our interest for this situation to prolong. You mentioned how it will impact India. It will impact India because already today the oil prices touch $107 because Russia is the second largest contributor of oil in the world, and tight supply from coming into the oil will impact the economy big time. So it's not in our interest. So we want it to be diffused as quickly as possible. You mentioned about our military hardware procurement from Russia. I don't think that's going to be impacted, quite honestly, because it's not hostage to the Ukrainian crisis, and it's a very strong and deep-rooted relationship, the military relationship. Coming to especially the supply of S-400 missiles from Russia, which the Americans had objected, but I think Anthony Blinken's, or it's a Ned Price, the spokesperson of the U.S. State Department, he has already made a statement when India abstained in the UN Security Council that they understand India's position and historically deep-rooted and a friendly relationship with Russia. Actually, this is the exercise in strategic autonomy, Manis. As we grow as a power, a confident India looks at its interests in a rational and a principled way, but is not going to be bullied by either side to take a partisan view. I think this maturation or maturity, India acquiring that diplomatic maturity and its benign assertion as an emerging power is being shown in the kind of position it has taken on the Ukrainian crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Aneja.
This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
Welcome back to World News. The UN General Assembly has voted to demand that Russia stop its offensive in Ukraine and withdraw all troops, with nations from world past to tiny island states condemning Moscow. The vote Wednesday was 141 to 5, with 35 abstentions. It came after the 193-member assembly convened its first emergency session since 1997. Assembly resolutions aren't legally binding, but they do have clout in reflecting international opinion. The resolution deplored Russia's aggression against Ukraine in the strongest terms and demanded an immediate and complete withdrawal of all Moscow forces. Countries that spoke up for Russia included Belarus, Cuba, North Korea and Syria. The World Bank has announced more than $1 billion in humanitarian aid for Afghanistan. An agency report said that the money will go to UN agencies and international NGOs while remaining outside the control of the country's Taliban rulers.
The Sensex and the Nifty today plunged more than 1%. Both stocks declined amid negative global cues. The BSE Sensex finished below the 55,500 mark, while the NSE Nifty ended near 16,600 level. The 12th ICC Women's Cricket World Cup is all set to begin from Friday, 4th March in New Zealand. The opening match will be played between the hosts and the West Indies at Bay Oval in Tauranga. The teams participating are Australia, Bangladesh, England, India, New Zealand, Pakistan, South Africa and West Indies.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. Taiwan News reports that 7 Chinese military aircraft entered Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ. The Guardian reports China has signaled its willingness to play a mediator role in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine as the war entered its 6th day. Al Jazeera reports U.S. delegation arrives in Taiwan amid tensions with China. Reuters reported a top Chinese official warned that China's economy faces multiple challenges at home and abroad this year. Foreign policy headlines: China's propaganda over Ukraine is sifting and uncertain. Beijing is backing Moscow, but less so than in the early days of war. A quick look at the headlines once again. Prime Minister Narendra Modi says government is working round the clock to bring back Indians stranded in war-torn Ukraine. Indian Embassy in Ukraine issues urgent advisory asking its nationals to leave Kharkiv immediately. Nearly 17,000 Indian nationals leave Ukraine border since advisory issued, says MEA. India evacuates stranded citizens from Ukraine via Moldova. National Disaster Response Force sends relief material to Ukraine. UN General Assembly votes to demand Russia to stop its offensive in Ukraine. European Union bans 7 Russian banks from SWIFT. And in cricket, 12th ICC Women's World Cup to begin from Friday in New Zealand. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.